Hello everyone and welcome to Speaker Series, a monthly webinar about bigger picture issues and what they might mean for financial advisors and people in the health and life insurance industry. My name is Adam Saville, Chief Editor for Vitality, and today is our last session of our autumn programme for 2022 before we take a break over Christmas and resume in the new year. And we've got a very special session lined up. Today we're going to be exploring the very personal topic of grief. According to the Bereavement Commission, across England and Wales, 614,000 people died between 2020 and 2021, which left an estimated 3 million people facing bereavement. And as we'll explore today, grief can be much more than just losing a loved one. It can be triggered by any major life event involving loss, including loss of a job, or a big change that leaves someone questioning their own identity. And during Men's Health Month, we'll be digging into this complex issue today, while looking at how men can be impacted, in particular, in a world where we're still facing a lot of stigma around mental health, especially for men. Given the nature of our audience today, we'll also be touching upon the intersection between grief, mental health, and financial health, which at this time we can all agree is an increasingly important topic. So I'm very grateful to be joined by Adrian Benjamin today, a financial advisor himself who will be sharing his own very personal experience with us today. Hi Adrian. We're also joined by Lizzie Pickering, who's an author, filmmaker, and grief investigator, and her book When Grief Equals Love is due to be published in May 2023. Hi, Lizzie.
Hi, Adrian.
Hey,
So it's great to have you both with us today. Thank you very much. And as I said in the brief intro there, so we're going to be talking about the very complex issue of grief. Lizzie, a topic that you've done a lot of work investigating, and one that you've also encountered personal experience of. Myself, as the host today, I too have lost someone very close to me about 5 years ago. My mother passed away. So I think between us, we're going to be able to deal with the topic. And I'd like to kind of implore our readers to please feel free to share their comments in the chat, ask any questions you may have for Adrian or Lizzie or myself, and also just feel free just to take in the conversation. We are going to be dealing with some quite sensitive topics today. But yeah, feel free to share with us during the presentation or pick up with us outside of it. So to get things started, Adrian, I'm going to start with you. If you could please tell us a little bit about why you're here today. I know you've got something that you've been through recently that you were quite keen to share with our audience.
Yeah, so thank you for having me, Adam. Yeah, so I am a financial protection advisor. I've been in the industry for about 2 years, and obviously I deal with talking about death every day. And obviously a couple of months ago it was always theory. If this was to happen, these are the steps, I'm here to help you. And then for it to happen to me and my family, and obviously in real time, it's completely changed everything. But I just really wanted to bring more awareness to how people can deal with their mental health, get support. And obviously having a financial protection advisor or an independent financial advisor is there to help you as well. Another reason why I'm doing this is because when my dad, suddenly passed away on the 5th of May, I watched your interview with Simon Thomas, who was the Sky Sports presenter, and that really, resonated and helped me and my mother at the time. During the time of the filming, I know his son Ethan was 8, and unfortunately his partner at the time passed, of blood cancer. So the fact that I can still remember those points, shows how powerful that was for me watching it. And then a few weeks later, I had the courage to watch Rio Ferdinand's documentary on BBC iPlayer. Unfortunately, he lost his mother and his wife. So this affects everyone. It doesn't matter what job you have, how much money you earn. This is always going to hit you at some point. And I understand why people don't want to think about it and talk about it. 100% get it. But the more comfortable we get, as people of all backgrounds talking about it as a family, the easier it's going to be. So again, the reason why I'm doing this is because those two conversations helped me deal with it. And obviously, knowing you, Adam, for over a year, I didn't know about your situation until we had a chat at the NED. You know, that helped me, you know, about your experience. So, you know, that's why I'm doing it. And I also feel a sense of responsibility as being one of the faces of the protection industry to not just talk about the good times when we go out, but, you know, this two things can be true. And I think with social media, it is a highlight reel. And if people look at mine, it is a highlight reel at the minute. And I'm very happy because I work very, very hard. But, you know, I'm also dealing with this at the same time. So two things can be true. I watched the Cristiano Ronaldo interview yesterday. You know, he's like one of the biggest superstars in the world. And, you know, he tragically lost his son. And he's still got to deal with work. So for him to speak about it yesterday, you know, on a global stage is huge. And you're right, and it's okay to speak about how you feel and get the support. So that's the reason why I'm doing this interview today.
Thank you, Adrian, and you made some really powerful points there. And I think people in the audience, people watching today, many of them financial advisors will no doubt be kind of nodding their heads, you know, saying, wow, we do talk about death every day. And actually, you know, we are very aware of the importance of having these conversations. But actually, let's not overlook the fact that we are personally affected by it too, and we'll dig a bit more into how it can affect not just you personally, Adrian, but also maybe how it's affected your professional life as well. And you touched upon a few points there. But Lizzie, I mean, what do you make of Adrian sort of sharing with us today? You know, I personally find it really remarkable.
It's fantastic, and thank you for your courage, Adrian, and to Adam for hosting. It's wonderful to be part of this conversation. And you know, without being too gendered, I think it's incredible that more men are speaking out about grief, because I think women traditionally have maybe spoken a bit more about it. I remembered when I worked for Children's Hospice, Helen House, years ago, we tried to set up dads groups, and because the dads were all saying they wanted support just for them, but actually they tended not to show up quite a lot, even if we hosted them in pubs and all sorts of places we thought would be more accessible. And so that silence was still sort of infiltrating their world. And I think now more men are speaking up. There's a lot more following suit. You know, Rob Delaney, the actor, has recently been talking about the death of his son. He's just written a book and is doing a book tour at the moment. Nick Cave, the musician, singer, poet, has just been talking about the death of his sons. And it just really helps grow that community of men who are grieving and who are able to speak about it. So thank you, Adrian.
I think Adrian said it right, didn't he, when he said that actually it allows other people to feel like they can also open up too. And I heard a fantastic quote at a mental health summit a year or two ago, the Make a Difference summit. It was that basically every personal story is like a lifeboat that you're actually sharing with someone else. And when they're at sea, they've got their own challenges. Everyone's challenge is different at sea, but the lifeboat that comes out is a vehicle for them to feel connected and some sort of support and being, you know, somehow some sort of kind of salvation in a way. But Lizzie, I mean, it's interesting. We've got 3 people here today, including myself. But Adrian is still very recent. You know, we're talking, you know, within the last few months or so, within a year. Yourself as well, Lizzie, and you've also been through your own experience of grief, and myself 5 years on. So we're all at very different stages. And before I ask the question, kind of how does time affect grief? Because I can imagine people watching today will be at their own different stages of this journey. So we can touch on the impact of time. But before we do, would you mind, if you wouldn't mind sharing your own experience, Lizzie, just to give the audience an idea of kind of what you've achieved in your career and how it's changed over the recent years?
Of course, yes. So my son Harry actually died 22 years ago today. It's the anniversary of his death today, and it feels very apt to be talking about it today with you. And when this booking came in to talk to you both, I thought, well, what could be more appropriate? You know, isn't that the best way of spending the anniversary? Actually, you know, talking to others in the grieving community. So Harry had a genetic condition that all our children, male and female, had a 1 in 4 chance of having. He lived 6.5 years. And so I was full-time carer. I left my career in television to become a full-time carer, had 3 children under the age of 4 and 1 in a wheelchair. So they were really challenging years. And I was very lucky that I had the help and support of a children's hospice to guide us through, and very good bereavement support for 2 years afterwards. So that community was naturally there around me of other bereaved parents, which was a very big lesson early on in the power of community and talking about grief. And I don't think I'd be able to do what I do now unless I'd had that support. And so I really wanted to help other people get that support. And I was sort of very interested that I ended up working in the Children's Hospice as a fundraiser for 12 years, but also working with the bereavement team very, very closely. And I learned so much in that time. And what I heard over and over again from parents were the same themes coming through about their grief. About the loneliness, that you could be surrounded by very good friends and family, but still feel lonely in your grief because they didn't necessarily share the same grief, even if it was for the same person. That people had to go back to work, you know, for money, obviously, we have to work, so there's no choice. And they wanted to go back to work for a sense of normality. But what they found quite often in the workplace was, again, this sort of loneliness and this silence where people didn't always know what to say, whether to bring up the topic or not, how to approach it, what language to use. And so the work I do now and the book I've just written, which is called When Grief Equals Love, Long-Term Perspectives on Living with Loss, is about all of that. And I work with companies now helping people back to work after major bereavements, and working with their teams around all those topics of what can we say, what shouldn't we say, what helps, what doesn't, and just integrating death into life, really. Because I don't know whether you both agree, and it may be too early on, but what I've gradually learned is that in a way with bereaved people, people say to me, is your work not depressing? And I never find it depressing, because what I witness in people who are recently bereaved is courage, as Adrian's showing today, in just breathing each day and getting up and managing a day. That's courage right there when you're traumatized. And also, I think we can find a new impetus for our work and for our life when we're bereaved, because we have a new perspective on what life means and the importance of breathing and the importance of family and friends and our work community. But the trouble is, often the isolation can come when not everybody is caught up with that. They're still feeling worried about speaking to you about it, but you might be feeling a bit of this sort of energy of life because you've just witnessed death. And so there are all these sort of strange juxtapositions that go on that can be challenging, because everybody's in a slightly different place. So the work I do is to try and help find a balance, I suppose, and a perspective.
And I guess one of the things we can say about grief is that it affects everybody differently. You know, I've heard you say before, Lizzie, in a public setting, it's messy, and I think that's a really apt description. And it's not, you know, and Adrian, and you've shared with us in the lead up to this about, from your perspective, about how it does affect everybody differently. And I think, interestingly, what Lizzie has just touched upon there, and going back to the concept of time, I find it very interesting, considering that it's not just your own time as well. And Adrian, I don't know what it was like for you, but there's an element of not just having to shoulder your own grief, but also support those around you, and having your own time and space to feel what you need to feel. And at the same time, we use the term often wrongly, we need to sort of man up. But actually, there for men especially, I don't know if you agree with this, but there is sometimes a requirement to stay strong when you're maybe not even feeling strong, or just dealing with it in your own way, in a way that you have to at that time?
No, I think you're right. People do say stay strong, because I think that's what everyone feels is right. But as you mentioned before, sometimes it's not appropriate. And I know when people say that, they don't mean any harm by it. But when we had that conversation, I was like, if I hear that one more time, I've heard it 1,000 times, I just don't want to hear it anymore. And I get people trying to be supportive, but it doesn't help. It doesn't. I didn't feel it did anything. But they don't know anything, and the reason why is because we don't talk about how to deal with grief. So it's not their fault. If there's more awareness, are we doing now? So for me, I would say to someone, is it okay for me to talk about it? Do you want to talk about it? Yes or no? Then just dive into a conversation of what's happened to you, and it's all about them and what happened to them. It's like, I'm sad for your loss, but I'm going through mine right now. So it's getting that awareness. And again, when people hear the news, your phone is literally blowing up. It's just constantly ringing, vibrating, and it actually brings a lot of anxiety. So how I dealt with it, I just turned it off, because I need to help my mother, my sister, and everyone who's with me now. And the real people came and they drove up. I need to focus on the people in the room. That's how I dealt with it. Some people try and answer every call. I don't think that's wise. Like, you need to fix yourself first, like how they tell you in the airplane, fix your oxygen mask yourself before you help everyone else. So that's how I personally dealt with it. I think texting is a lot better. Is it okay for you to speak? Let me know, then just ring, because we have people all around the world calling us, and they have no idea about what time it is over here. They just want to ring. And if you're not answering, it keeps on escalating. So that's why I personally turned my phone off at the time, and I reached back to people when I felt it was suitable for me. Because you've got a lot of people hijacking and making it about them, which is ridiculous. But that's what people think you want to hear, and it makes you feel better when they've not asked for your permission. So that's why I dealt with it.
Yes, there's a really important point there about boundaries, isn't there, and your own boundaries in place. And Lizzie, a lot of the people watching will be financial advisors themselves, and they are talking about death pretty much on a daily basis. Have you considered what would happen should something happen to you or a member of your family? It would be a question they might ask. And I mean, from your side, as a non-industry member, someone who isn't in the financial services industry, how do we make
Adam, it's frozen.
Yeah, he's frozen.
Adam, sorry, do you mind repeating it? It just froze.
Oh.
Shall we carry on talking for a minute, Adrian, just while I'm not sure what the question was actually.
I think what he was trying to say was cool.
Adam, has it come? Do you mind repeating the question?
I can hear you now. Sorry, my connection went down. My question was, Lizzie, a lot of the people watching will be financial advisors who have to talk about death on a daily basis, and they'll be asking questions like how would you cope if something was to happen to you financially, or some.
Did you hear the end of that, Adrian?
Yeah, I think what Adam's trying to say is, how would you in the question of death as a financial advisor? I think that's the question.
Yes. I think it's just being open about it. I think, when the main thing is never to try and fix anybody. As you intimated earlier, Adrian, it's so frustrating when people say stay strong or come out with platitudes. I think platitudes are an absolute no-no. And the bottom line, for somebody who's grieving, is you cannot make them better. And you need to just be alongside them and absolutely get comfortable in your discomfort, because we all feel it. I spend my life talking to bereaved people every single day, all day long, in grief guidance sessions, and I can still feel uncomfortable about it because I'm so scared of getting it wrong. And because we basically, as human beings, we want people to be better, we want them to feel okay, we want them to be happy, don't we? And You know, when somebody dies and we're going through grief as you are now, that's not possible for quite a long time. It takes a long time to adapt to it, very slowly, for your whole body, your whole mind, every cell in your body to adapt to this new situation. And it is never going to be overnight. It's going to be very, very gradual, incremental adaptation to this new situation. And that happens slowly over time. The worst thing I think anyone can say is that time heals. I think that's almost the most offensive platitude, because I don't think it does. It's 22 years on for me, and I can be set back in a second if I look at a photo of my son for too long. But I live with it, and I live a very happy life, but with my grief. It's never changed. My love for my son has never changed, and therefore the pain has never changed. But I have learnt to adapt around it and to live with it and to work and to follow my passions as a result of it, as you are now in this very moment, doing what you're doing with that strong feeling of needing to do it and how you can help other people. And so when you're talking to people professionally, I think the main thing is, yes, to say, I'm so sorry you've been through this. We're here for you. If there's ever anything practical we can do to help, please let us know. You know, or if you ever want to have a coffee or a virtual chat or to keep in touch, please do so. We're here for you. And that's all we can ever say, really, is we're here for you. Yes, there are sometimes practical opportunities of signposting to reading or finding an article that might be useful, that might resonate, but nothing's ever going to make anybody feel better. And that's the bottom line. And I think Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, summed it up so beautifully when she said, "We cannot know your pain, but we will walk beside you every step of the way." And for me, I always say to people who ask that question, what can we say? What do we say? What do we do? That's the bottom line. And if you can come up with your own wording around that phrase, then that's sort of a good starting point for how to open up a conversation.
Can you help him?
My absence. I'm here, but I caught the majority of that, I hope. But Adrian, what are some of the things you mentioned? Being told sort of be strong isn't particularly helpful, because actually it's okay for us not to be okay, right? And actually, and you made the point earlier that your social media feed might give the impression that you're out at awards dues, or you're out meeting clients, and you're doing your videos about financial protection. So therefore, on the surface, everything looks fine. And I'm not going to make a massive generalization about all men. I don't think that's a helpful thing to do. One thing, as being a male myself, is a sense that sometimes grief can feel like it's more of when someone's struggling with their mental health or going through something like grief, it feels like it can be quite private. And Lizzie said, there's a loneliness to it. So what are some of the things that you've done, Adrian, to navigate the last sort of 6 months or so? It's been I can imagine it's been a real rocky journey. So what are some of the things that you've experienced so far?
Yeah, so for me, it was trying to be as normal as possible. So obviously I'm going through it, but I'm self-employed, so I have to work. So for me, because I'm passionate and I love what I do, it's okay. If this had happened 2 years ago, at the beginning of COVID, when there were no contracts and jobs in finance for me for a year, we'd be in a completely different situation. So for me, I feel fortunate about timing. I work for a good company where they said, look, Adrian, take as long as you need. There's no end date. Like, if you want to come back next year, cool. I'm very fortunate in that I know some people, it's okay, you've got 2 days bereavement and then go back to work and be normal. And other people don't know what you're going through, so they're going to keep on piling and work on you. And I feel very empathetic for people who have to deal with that, the pressure of work anyway, and with that, and not people don't know as well. I spoke to my dad little bit more before he passed, and he was like, I'm happy with what you're doing, and he'd always just say, like, try your best. So that's what I'm doing. So in a weird way, it's kind of comforting doing what I'm doing. It's kind of similar to what he did, is just trying to help people and bring awareness. So I kind of had an escape through work. Some people didn't, because you see me, Adam, I'm out every day. I was like, yesterday, as soon as we finish this, I'm going back to a business conference. Like, that's how my life is at the minute. But I feel if you have a lot of free time, then it can be kind of worse, I feel, because, you know, sometimes I don't really have a free day by myself to really think about what's actually happened, which is good or bad, depending on how you want to look at it. I do, you know, want to try and be as normal as possible. But when I've had two people that kind of helped. I've had one friend who unfortunately lost his father 2 years ago, was pushing me to speak to a bereavement counsellor. I said, I'm fine, I don't want to do it. And then I have a client who unfortunately lost her mother as well. And we're all around the same age, like mid-30s. And because they kind of encouraged me, I'd say my female friend pushed, and she said, you're always being strong for people. What about you? You said you would have had the call last week, you've not done it. So I go, if I speak to you and you've not gone, I'm going to be annoyed. You know, I look up to like an older sister, and if she hadn't done that, you know, I wouldn't be doing it. And I think you're right, perception. If someone had told me 15, 20 years ago, I'll be speaking to it, I'd be like, no, like, we don't do that. Like, why not? But because, you know, people have encouraged me and they're around the same age and things like that, it has helped. And also as a protection advisor, you know, with my life insurance, this is part of the policy. This is what you're paying for professionals when you need them. And that's another reason why I'm doing it as well. And they have been very helpful. I've done 3 sessions now. You don't have to do it every week. It can get spaced out, but I'm happy and grateful that my 2 friends and, you know, client encouraged me to do it, and it's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. I didn't do it at the beginning because I didn't feel I was ready. You know, there's no time frame for this. Some people might be ready a year or 2 years later. That's also fine. I was like, okay, well, I was thinking, like, what's the worst that's going to happen? You know, and it's great to speak to someone independent, because you have so many things going on. Sometimes it's difficult always speaking to your friends and family about the same things. You want a completely different person. And the first call was really difficult. Like, he's asking me questions that I never thought of, and I'm trying not to break down on the phone, but I'm like, okay, fine. And then we had the second call, which was better. And then the third call, he can tell by my tone of my voice that I can feel that you're better now, you're doing different things, and you're trying to do, I don't know, yoga and different things just to get my mind off it. You know, things I never thought I'd ever do like 15, 20 years ago. But, you know, I've got to mature as a man and be more emotionally aware and try and work on that. And like we said, because of social media and people speaking out and, you know, big people in their industry, it's helped, right? So now when I speak to clients, I'm like, look, you might need this, not for you, but if something happens to anyone else in your family, you can speak to a trained professional. And that's the huge thing about this industry, speaking to people who know what they're talking about to help you. So yeah, I'm obviously a big advocate of it, speaking to someone who knows what they're talking about.
I find that incredibly inspiring and such a powerful way of putting it, Adrian. The more we normalise the conversation around talking therapy and the importance of talking and the first step is the hardest step. It was for me as well, was admitting that I wasn't okay, because it was actually it was almost easier to just bury my head in the sand. And me personally, that kind of sent me down a path that I ultimately didn't want to go down. And it wasn't until I reached a point of, you know, this enough is enough. You know, I need to reach out and speak about this. That's when it all changed for me. So Adrian, you know, I really applaud you for sharing that today. And Lizzie, a lot of the people on the webinar today watching, some of them will be having conversations with employers about how they can support the health and the mental health of staff. And you touched upon this briefly earlier about the role of the workplace, but you're a big advocate for grief champions in the workplace, for example, almost like mental health champions or buddies in the workplace, where you know you can go and you can speak to someone there. And there's 2 questions here really. Is please tell us a bit about that, if you would. But then secondly, how do we make sure we get that right? Because actually not everyone in the workplace, I'm not qualified to provide advice or to be a counsellor, but I've been through something. So how do those in the call that may think, well, I want to help other people, but at the same time, I also don't want to overstep. I also don't want to say the wrong thing and do more harm than good. So how do we get that right?
I think it's just simply with grief about checking in with people. And as Adrian said earlier, there is no time frame. And for some people, you know, I mean, grief goes on for years, 22 years for me. And I was interested this morning at the first person that checked in with me, who was a very, very old friend. I've put nothing about Harry's anniversary on social media, but an old friend sent me a text at 7 o'clock this morning saying, thinking of you today. And it means so much. It lifted my spirits that 22 years on, she knows what date my son died and is thinking of me. That's it. And so with the grief allies or the grief buddies, it's not about being a trained counsellor or really having any training. It's about with the companies I work with, I'll go in and do a talk to a team where maybe somebody's been through a serious bereavement, and we'll have an open conversation about grief and the trajectory of grief and a sort of educational talk, and we debate together. And then after that, the grief buddy could be anybody in the team who they're particularly close to. And it's just that they take responsibility for checking in on that person about their grief. And as time progresses and changes, you know, somebody might not want to talk at all for 6 months, and they may just want to be working very, very hard and almost be on the run. And I did that for nearly 8 years. I threw myself into work and worked every hour and looked after my young children. And if I wasn't doing one of those things, you know, that would give me headspace to think, and I didn't want to think. I wanted to hold on to a structure of work and children and keep going. And that worked for me. And, you know, yes, I was having bereavement help and support every couple of weeks, but it was all this sort of balancing act of keeping going, I suppose. And so it's just a case of that person checking in and saying, how's work going? How's home life going? You know, is there anything that work can help you with, particularly at the moment? Do you need any extra support? And then if there's an answer of yes to any of those things, finding out what could be done. You know, if the person who's bereaved doesn't feel like researching, it could be that their grief ally goes to HR and says that, you know, they're struggling at the moment. What can we do? What can you suggest? What are the resources they could access? And so sometimes it's just being that person on the ground, really, to translate to other people how they're feeling with their permission. And I mean, the example of that, and I suppose it's what I do slightly, because I'm not a trained counsellor or therapist, but I do one-to-one sessions for people. An example is that recently a lawyer with a very, very busy job in a law firm was bereaved. And it threw up a lot about the past, and there was a house to clear, and it was all very challenging, uncovering everything about this family without giving too much away. And I was able to talk to this person and liaise with HR, because HR were worrying about him so much that they wanted him to take a month off because they felt everything was falling apart and they could witness it. He wanted to work because he's worried about his client base and losing his job ultimately. He got 3 young children going through this bereavement, a new baby, you know, so he couldn't sort of go with his partner and clear this house. And together we came up with a practical plan, which was a lot of friends had offered help, but he hadn't taken them up on any of it. It didn't know how to ask them. Work wanted him to take time off that he didn't want, but he needed to do something. So the idea that came up was, what about if you took a day every other week? So every 2 weeks, you're going to take a Friday. You're never going to clear that house alone again. You're going to ask each of your friends who's offered help to take a day off, go with you, and spend the day doing it with you. And it only took 6 days every other week. It was done. The friends were with him. They bonded so strongly because he was vulnerable and courageous in asking for help, and they felt included, and they learned so much about his grief. So, but those are friends for life now who experienced his grief alongside him, not fixing it, but helping in a practical way. And the HR team and work knew exactly how to plan for that. He didn't panic that he was letting clients down because it was only a day every other week. It was totally manageable. And we talked to his team and said, this is the arrangement. So that was an example of a very practical solution to help guide him through his grief. It brought his community very strongly together with him in his grief. And it set him up for the future in some way. And it was just being able to have that open conversation about what was really practically needed at that time. And, you know, and check in on anniversaries, check in on birthdays, just check in. And whenever I say check in, it could be a WhatsApp, a text. It's not rocket science. It could be a phone call. It could be, shall we have a Zoom coffee? It can be anything at all. But I would always say no reply necessary at the end of it, because someone in grief, in big, deep grief, as Adrian has said, when you're absolutely overwhelmed with calls and sadmin, as it's often known, you know, there is so much admin, isn't there, around a death. And you can be overwhelmed. And so when you check in, somebody may not even reply, but that's fine. Don't give up. Carry on for that year, for the next year and beyond. And, you know.
Yeah, because as soon as you start to expect to reply, you're making it about you, and it should be about them. The story you just shared, Lizzie, really does bring home the fact it takes a village, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, the expression, and I think the workplace has a crucial role to play there, and you know, and being the support that's needed in the right way. And also, I think your story as well also brought to life the intersection that we mentioned at the beginning between grief, mental health, obviously the grief process itself, and also financial pressures. And one thing that a financial advisor is there to do, and Adrian mentioned Simon Thomas's story. He was on a previous speaker series webinar with us about how a life insurance claim for his wife after she suddenly passed away was the thing that allowed him the time and space that he needed. He didn't bring back his wife, he didn't solve everything, but it was the time and space that he needed to look after his 9-year-old son. And that meant he didn't have to go back to work. A very high profile job for Sky Sports. So Adrian, does that really sort of like hit home the power of financial advice? The fact that a life insurance claim, whether it's one that is paid out while the individual's still alive, for example, like a serious illness or critical illness policy, or one that is paid out to the family who may be going through a bereavement?
I think they're all important, like you said, and just now it gives the person an option. You know, some people might want to carry on as normal. You know, if they want to take a break, they can. Like when you have that tax-free lump sum or a monthly payment, it gives you options. And the reason why I'm passionate about this is I'm also into property as well. And I feel I don't really like auctions, because one of the first properties I was going to buy was a repossessed property, which I've never been in before. And I know how hard, how much saving I had to do to get mine. And I was just thinking, like, wow, like it can all be taken away. You know, I want to know what the stats are of properties and auctions where, you know, someone's unfortunately passed away and they've lost everything. You know, and it doesn't matter if you're the main breadwinner or not, it's going to have an impact. So this is why now I know it's potentially another cost. It's so important. You want to make sure if you're not here, your family's lifestyle maintains or improves. You know, they don't want to have to worry about things like that, because like I said, I'm fortunate that the timing was, it's never great, but like I said, if it had happened 2 years ago, I don't know what would have happened, to be honest, and it probably would have been a downward spiral. But because I've got structure and a good company, I've been all right, but I know other people aren't. That's why I keep on pushing, because some people think they're all right and they're not. You know, everyone's a paycheck away from losing something. So yeah, the products are important, and like I've been saying since day one, you know, spreading awareness is the major thing, and I think more people are trying to understand it now as well. So.
And Adrian, has it changed the way you're talking to clients now?
No, it hasn't. No, it hasn't. I don't bring my dad up. I don't talk about it. And like we said before, I was great at my job, you know, before my dad passed, and that's not going to change. If it comes up, then fine. But no, I don't bring it up, because the reason why I don't bring it up, I don't want the client to feel he's emotionally selling something to me. That's why I straight don't do it. if it comes up, then fine. But no, I would never say, oh, this happened to my dad. And no, it's not. The client doesn't need to know that.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. And I think every advisor is going to have their own different way of connecting with clients. And I'd be really happy to hear any comments in the chat from our viewers, and any questions for Adrian or Lizzie. We will have some time towards the end, and we are steadily approaching that time. But Lizzie, tell us a bit more about today. You know, you talked about your obviously not just today. I know today is a significant day for you, the anniversary of, and we've spoken about that, but the book's coming out soon, and as I said before, we're all at different stages in our journey, and it's different for everyone. What are some of the key things that you've learned during your career about this topic?
There's something that always comes back to me, and it's that at the beginning of my grief, I felt very confused about enjoying myself. I remember I was at my younger son's. I have a surviving son and daughter, thank heaven. I'm very, very lucky. And I was at a nativity play for my son Cam, and the children were being very funny. And it was about a month after Harry had died. He was at the same school, and I was surrounded by the parents and children who knew him, and we were very much part of that community. And I got absolutely hysterical laughter and during this nativity play, and once I started laughing, I couldn't stop, you know, and I got into that state where you cannot stop. And this is a month after my son died, and I mean, obviously I had cried bucket loads of tears for years before he died, because I was living anticipatory grief from a diagnosis, knowing that he was going to die, and it was terrible. And I'd cried and cried and cried, and obviously I was grieving every minute of every day, and that was just a moment of laughter, of release. And I felt so guilty. And then I heard this wonderful quote, which was, "The depth of your sorrow is the height of your joy." And really, when I heard it, it resonated massively, because I sort of thought, well, sorrow is down here and joy is up here somewhere. They're poles apart. How can that be? And now, 22 years on, I would say that they're here. And my grief is here, and my happiness is here in my life now. And they're absolutely balancing each other. You know, they have parity. There's no one without the other. And so I think what I've really learned is that grief stays with you, because that's the title of the book, When Grief Equals Love. And when I first wrote that title, it was going to be a grief endured, because that's what it felt like. But now I really try and help my clients change their perspective, because if the amount we've loved somebody is the amount of pain we're in, that's why the pain is so deep and so challenging and so extraordinary, and has to be managed in whatever way you find, whether it's yoga, exercise, therapy, guidance. There's a great big recipe out there. There's a menu, you know, of how you can manage your grief, and finding the right way for you, whether you're somebody who likes to talk or not. There are many, many ways of accessing good grief guidance, or doing it for yourself. But somehow this sort of going forward and managing the grief, and it representing the love, it changed my perspective on it. And it made me realize I was going to live with it for the rest of my life. And I think when you're first bereaved, you think there must be a cure for this. There must be a way. How can I live with this pain for the rest of my life? It can't be possible. But it is, and it's this incrementally adapting to it very slowly, and accepting that it is going to be with you. But in a way, you don't want it to define you, but you want to do something really good with it to represent that relationship. And that's what Adrian's doing here today, and what you are too, Adam. We all are. We're honouring our loved ones by talking about them, and by working hard, and honouring ourselves as well, in a way.
There's a beautiful duality to grief equals love, isn't there? And actually, when I first heard that, and I realised, it was quite early on in my grief, I heard the concept that the reason why I feel so much pain is because the person I lost it's the opposite of gratitude in a way, or the opposite of love. It's the opposite of love, isn't it? It's the pain that you have. And because I was so grateful for that person being alive, when they were gone, I had this horrific pain when they weren't there. And actually what I realized is that the reason why I had that pain, it almost made me feel grateful for the fact they existed in the first place. And it's a very hard thing to, and I wouldn't ever preach that to somebody that's feeling pain, because you can't say what you feel right now, you should feel good about that. But it's not. And I think what your books, is laying out there is a very complicated issue, but putting it to us in a really simple way, and trying to, simplify something that is incredibly difficult to articulate. And another thing, Lizzie, as well, I'm fascinated by, and something that Vitality is obviously very interested in, is the connections between our mental health and our physical health. And you talk about quite a lot the fact that we feel grief physically as well as our emotions and the emotions involved. Tell us, please, a little bit about that.
Well, I think there are some very strong physical effects of grief that people may or may not experience, depending on their own metabolism and their own fitness and everything else. But if we don't talk about our grief and we don't process it in whatever way is best for us, and acknowledge it and live it and feel it, our body can store it, and that is very dangerous. So an example is that after the Second World War, when there was that message, don't mention the war, don't ask about what you've witnessed, and don't talk about it when you come home, to the soldiers. That was where this silence started, really, of don't mention it. And so many of those soldiers suffered from PTSD, and some were sectioned 30 to 40 years after the Second World War because their bodies had stored that trauma. So it's very important. And classic things are expressions that we don't necessarily connect with, but a gut reaction. Our guts can really suffer. There are so many doctors giving out omeprazole, and I see this with my clients. They're on anti-acid drugs for gut reactions because they're suffering in that way, but actually it's often grief related. Broken heart doesn't show up on a scan, but so many of my clients, and I've spoken to a heart doctor about this, go for heart scans and think they're having a heart attack, but it's often a panic attack through grief because they're trying to carry on normal life, and it's all contained in here, and it will come out at some stage. A lump in the throat constriction, and breathing. There's a great irony that when somebody dies, we, the bereaved, stop breathing properly. And that's why, Adrian, it's so fantastic you're doing yoga, because it literally reminds us to breathe, doesn't it? And it gets our breathing going. And I went to a cranial sacrotherapist. So for the whole 22 years, I've been exploring and investigating what will help my grief. And it's an ongoing process for the rest of my life. And I find constantly new things to help as it changes. And a cranial sacrotherapist said to me on the first session, and she didn't know about my son, when did you stop breathing properly? And I said maybe 16 years ago at the time. And she helped me again to get my breathing going. And she said, if we don't breathe properly and we hold our breath through trauma and stress, we're not sending oxygen to our vital organs, and we will become ill. So that's a very direct, example. I had pneumonia for 4 years every year after my son died, and I touch wood, I haven't had it since. But it was a direct result of my breath, and dysfunction through grief.
Fascinating, isn't it? And I guess it's all about balance as well when it comes to getting physical activity is obviously a great way to probably release a lot of this. And talking, I think Adrian's example of the talking therapies and counselling, the not storing it up, is so actually a way talking therapy can be preventative as well as treatment as well. It can be a way of preventing you from having physical issues later down the line, potentially. We're running out of time. We've got a couple of questions that have come in. One of them from Rob Harvey. Interesting to hear that Adrian doesn't use his personal experience when discussing protection with clients. What are Adrian's and Lizzie's thoughts on using real life case studies with clients? Can these be effective, or is there a risk of coming across as though we're trying to emotionally guilt trip the client into purchasing protection? Adrian, you've really kind of touched upon that. And also Rafik has also said, I gather from Adrian that it is better not to reveal your grief to clients. So I know it's clear, it's probably worth saying there is no right or wrong answer.
Yeah,
I think
correct.
Yeah.
No, like some advisors might feel it's helping, and again, they're speaking to people, and again, that's dealing with the grief. So you're right, there's no right or wrong answer to that.
Right, brilliant. Thank you. So I'm going to have to close down the webinar, I'm afraid. But if anything that you've heard today to our viewers has affected them, there are Lizzie, there are some things that they can consider reaching out to or checking and seeking out if they want to seek out any support for themselves.
You're going to send something round, I think, aren't you, Adam? But yes, the Good Grief Trust has a fantastic resource of information for all sorts of different types of grief, with signposting. Cruise bereavement is very good. And there's a thing called the Good Grief Festival, which now on YouTube, it used to be a subscription of £20 a year, but on YouTube, they've now got free talks on YouTube from people like Julia Samuel. But we can send round a reading suggestion list. You know, for anyone that doesn't feel like talking, actually reading and researching about their own grief is equally as good, you know, doing your own investigation. So we can send round some suggestions.
And certainly check out your book in May as well, When Grief Equals Loved. And Adrian, thank you so much for joining us today and being so honest and taking the courage to share. And I think it's personally, I find it helpful. I hope our viewers, whether they're male or not, you know, in the audience have taken some strength from that. And Lizzie, your expertise, I know you don't like to be called a grief expert, but yeah, I very much see you as that. So thank you so much for taking the time, and thanks to our viewers for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion and found it helpful.
Thank you
Thanks
both.
a lot, Adam. Thanks a lot, Lizzie.
Have a great day. Bye.